This is Change the Narrative, the podcast about innovation in work, life, and culture. I'm your host and tour guide, Michael Hernandez. On this episode of Change the Narrative, I'm very excited to speak with someone who works in an industry very different than my own about how to publish your first nonfiction book. And beyond that, how you can use books as a way to market your business. So up next is Aubrey Bergauer, and she is hailed as the Steve Jobs of classical music. Bergauer is known for her customer-centric, data-obsessed pursuit of changing the narrative for the arts. A dynamic administrator with an unquenchable drive for canny innovation, she's held offstage roles at major institutions such as Chief Executive of the California Symphony. Bergauer's ability to cast and communicate vision inspires and unifies, earning her a reputation for coming up with great ideas and then realizing them. Her work and leadership has been covered in national publications, and she's a frequent speaker inside and outside the arts. Aubrey Bergauer, it's so great to speak with you and have you on the show. I'm really excited to hear about your latest book, and which is also your first book, and hear more about your work. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah. Okay. So this is your first book, I believe. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Can you tell me what it's about and who it's for?
The book is called Run It Like a Business, but it's the subtitle that really answers the question who it's for. And it's for arts organizations of all kinds. My background is classical music, but for any arts organization that sells tickets, raises money, that's who the book is for. And that's what it's about, is how do we, in a really tough climate, particularly coming out of the pandemic, but part of the thesis is that a lot of these challenges began before the pandemic. The pandemic just accelerated the challenges, but all to say, for any arts organization that is trying to grow their audiences, expand their donor base, get younger people in the seats on the donor roles, how to do that, basically the playbook. And there's a bunch of strategies that have proved successful outside of the arts that this book is really about. How do we take what's worked outside the arts and apply it to what we do in our cultural institutions?
That's so important. I think sometimes we get caught in our silos and think this is the only way we could do it because we've always been doing it this way. And it's kind of nice to look outside to other industries. I like that process a lot.
Yeah.
So why did you write this book? I mean, you mentioned a couple of the concerns and solutions that you're offering to folks, but why not just have like blog posts or a website? Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, it started with blog posts and website, to tell the truth. So my whole career has been in offstage arts management roles, and I've worked at institutions of all sizes, from leading a regional orchestra as the chief executive to on staff at major institutions. And I say that because regardless of the budget size or the geographic location or the market, so many of these challenges are prevalent. So no matter where you are at an arts organization, so many of these challenges persist. And in my work now, working with other organizations of all kinds all over the place, I was getting the question a lot of, what's the guide? What's the handbook? What do we do and we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century when the old model, you mentioned the way things have always been done. What do we do? And the way things have always been done aren't really working for us anymore. And so that was the impetus. And I thought, okay, it's time to take those blog posts and the other things that I had put out there over the years and really craft it into something that was actionable and could be that guidebook or playbook for folks.
Wow, I like how you phrase that as a guidebook. And speaking to some other authors, they felt it was the same way with their nonfiction book. I think it's a really great way to frame it. So what's the reaction been like to the book?
So positive, which I wasn't sure at first, because sometimes when you challenge the status quo, sometimes there is, resistance. And yet that's not been the case here. I think just so many people, whether it's arts administrators like myself or board members, which is so important to the equation, or artists and musicians themselves, just across the board, no matter the constituency, the feedback has been really positive. And I think it's because I tried really hard to bring the data. That's something I've become known for over the years in my work, and bring it together, all the data in different places, bring it together in a way that it's like, okay, here's kind of the writing on the wall for our industry if we don't buck those trends. And then it's not doom and gloom. It's, the whole rest of the book is but there are ways to buck those trends. So a real sense of the feedback I'm hearing is a real sense of like, okay, I understand kind of the nuts and bolts, like I said, the data, the research, and then also the uplifting part, which is trends can be reversed. And that is good news for anybody in any sector.
That's fantastic. And so there's so much like data, information, ideas. I think a lot of people, when they think about writing a book or sit down to do it, like struggle with what the focus is going to be about and how do I keep things on track and make sense. How did you approach that? How did you decide? I mean, I guess it's in the subtitle of your book, Run It Like a Business, you know, but how did you decide what the focus of this book was going to be about?
I knew I wanted to bring in what was working outside the arts, as I mentioned, and the organization of the book is that each chapter is a different strategy that has worked in other sectors. Every chapter also has application to like actual arts organizations. Some are ones I worked with, some are other case studies I found, but basically saying not just this is not just theory. Here is evidence of how it has played out for arts organizations today. And so that combination of like, yes, here's the idea from outside the sector, but then no, here's the concrete application and evidence of how it's worked and how it can work. That combination was really important to me. And then the last thing I'll say on this is even the title, Run It Like a Business, is a little bit provocative intentionally because so many people, anybody here listening who's worked with a board of directors, you can tell me if you've heard this, if a board member has ever been like, we just need to run this nonprofit like a business. And so many people, myself included, have rolled their eyes at that phrase. Like, oh, okay. Like, do you want us to be Amazon? Like, what are you saying when you say that phrase? So anyways, a little intentionally provocative by that title, but yet you just heard me say, I really do believe there are strategies in the quote unquote business world that we can apply. So yeah, kind of a double entendre a little bit with the title.
Right. I haven't read the book yet, but I do. That sounds like a great structure of like each is like a section or a type of solution along with case studies. And I feel like examples, case studies, and real world applications are so important to that. Yeah, this is great. And I feel like, we're kind of twinning. I forgot to mention at the beginning that you and I share a lot in common other than a mutual friend / fiance, my fiance. But also like we both have a newsletter with the same name, Change the Narrative. And also our books launched on the very same day, February 6th, 2024. So that was pretty exciting too. So definitely like we're both in different industries, but I see a lot of overlap in this. And I think that's something that's an important takeaway for folks is that to look outside and beyond and kind of make that Venn diagram happen for people, help them see what's possible because you are the person with those eyeballs who can, be that voice and be okay to kind of break through the tradition to help them see differently and back it up with the evidence and the data like you were talking about. Okay, so writing a book, this was your very first book. What were some of the obstacles and challenges you faced actually sitting down to write it?
I think in some ways I knew this was going to be a challenge, but just the discipline of it. I knew, like I made myself a work plan and you got to write this many words a day. And even if you can't get to that many words on Tuesday, then just sit down for 15 minutes and write something. I just tried to be very disciplined about, okay, no, every day. So I think that was definitely new for me. I had never produced that much writing over the period of, 6 months or whatever it was. So I think that was a challenge. And then maybe just the other part of the challenge for me was it's a business book, but it's for arts people. And people I already mentioned could be musicians or artists, could be employees of the organizations, it could be board members. And so that right there even is a bit of a range. And so one of the things I speak about, which comes back to the challenge of writing, is for arts organizations, this is like chapter 1, talking about how we have to be approachable and accessible. And that all comes, there's a lot of ways to do that, but it comes down to the words we use. And I just remember early on, my editor was saying to me, Aubrey, let's take your own advice, yes, it's a business book, but we got to dial back some of the words that I didn't even realize I was using, and she was like, kind of holding up the mirror a little bit. I was like, right. Okay. So we did a lot of work on that. So I would say that was a challenge particular to this book too, of no, you can't just throw out these like businessy MBA terms and expect everybody to know them. And like I said, taking your own advice, fun and not
Yeah.
fun.
Well, I think it's interesting because we throw jargon in, and I found that to be the case for my book sometimes too. And remembering who your audience is and writing for them, not for you. And for me, I think sometimes it was like I had to prove myself and I had to throw out the jargon, like I'm this, intellectual who has studied this and I have to use the language that's going to make me sound authoritative. And that's not necessarily the approach to take. And I think that's really great advice as far as the style and the tone of what you're
Yeah,
doing.
it doesn't serve the audience for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so nitty gritty of like you're busy, you're traveling the world, consulting and doing all these things. How did you find time to write? And you said you were writing every day. Was that like an hour a day? Was that like 3 hours a day? Was it like 10 minutes? Like what was sort of like day to day? What would that kind of look like?
Oh, I have to think back now. And now it feels like, in some ways, ancient history. I think
Mm,
an hour a day at least, I would say. And I don't know if this was your experience or not, but some days, depending on the topic or subject matter, some days, you get in flow state and it just comes and it's
mhm,
great. And then there were other times where it was not that way and it felt like a bit of a grind. And that's why I think I was like, oh yeah, that's why you got to be disciplined. You got to stick to it every day. But I think in some
mhm,
ways, usually I would say editing is easier. In this case, in some ways, it's easier than generating original content. But in some ways, it was the editing. Going back to the challenge I just mentioned, where it's like, okay, no, we really need to pull this apart and then build it back up. And so,
mhm.
anyways, I'm just trying to think. Like in some ways, I think the editing days may have been longer. Quick turnaround times too doesn't help that equation, but
Yeah.
yeah. But anyways, I would say an hour or so a day. I think.
Okay. Okay. That sounds about right. And so how long did it take you start to finish?
Let me think. Okay, contracted in May. First draft due November 1. So what is that right there? 5 months? Is that right? I don't know. June,
Hmm.
July, August,
Hmm.
September, October. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so 5 months of
Hmm.
writing the first draft, and then from there editing back and forth. Oh, I'm trying to think. Another maybe 6 or 7 months back and forth with the editor, the
Hmm.
different rounds.
Okay.
I want to say that's right. Something like that.
Wow. Well, that's great. My process was kind of like the opposite. Like it took me longer to write it, and then the editing happened quicker. Maybe it's
Okay.
writing styles, right? Like I'm a super perfectionist, and I like spend a lot of time doing the writing and thinking. Not that you didn't, but I'm very slow and methodical about mine. So it's interesting to hear how everybody balances. Also, I've heard advice too, like what you said, that they sprint to do the finish to get the first draft done and then go back and revise. And I think there's a lot of merit to that too, because you can see everything, how it fits together. And that's something that I struggled with too, is like I was like head down in the moment in this one chapter and I couldn't see where I was going or how it related necessarily to the other ones. I mean, you have the
Hmm.
outline and everything, of course, but
Yeah.
how it flowed and the tone would change if it took longer. And so that's really interesting to have yours a quick, well, I would I say a quick 5 months to do your book in the first draft. That's fantastic. And so what advice would you have, like logistically? Do you have like, post-it notes on the wall to sort of organize your thoughts? Did you have running Google Docs? What would that look like?
I had a doc of my outline, and I think a piece of advice we haven't mentioned yet that I would offer is on the citations. Like there were a lot of things where I thought like first time around I had documented it well enough and then found myself having to go back later and be like, okay, wait, where was this? What was the timestamp on that clip I
Mm,
pulled? Oh, now I gotta listen to the whole dang thing again, or things like that where it's like, okay, save yourself time later. And the first time you pull the source, whatever it is, like really really diligently cite it the way it needs to be properly cited. And I think that was the thing as a first time author. I thought I would have had more support in that. But
mhm.
no, 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 no. They're like, yeah, fix this, fix this citation. So yeah, I feel
You
like
mean from
that's
the
just something
editor?
bobbling around. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna get to talk working with editors here in a minute, but yeah, that's definitely like keeping track of things is tricky. Did you find that you had more content that you could include in the book? Or is everything there? Do you feel like you had to cut stuff in the editing
There were
phase?
definitely it came in longer than I was contracted for. So
Hmm.
then basically I had to ask the publisher, like, yes, we can cut and cut and cut and get down to the word count we contracted, or we can talk about what you feel is worth keeping. So we had that conversation, and definitely they expanded the final word count. So I was happy about that. I'm trying to think, there were definitely some parts we still cut, but I think in the end, it tightened it up in a way that I'm satisfied. I'm very satisfied with the final product. So is there more? I don't know. I get asked this a lot. Like, is there more? Are you still have more to tell? And I'm like, I think right now we're good. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So yeah, depending on what you do with that extra stuff or leave the audience wanting more, I think is always a good mindset to have. Okay. So you chose to work with a publisher, which came along with an editor, as opposed to self-publishing. Can you maybe talk about that decision to do that, and what was it like working with an editor?
Yeah, there's a lot in this question. I think I wanted to go with a publisher because I will say I weighed it a lot. So for anybody who's considering, like, I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer. I think it really is maybe just dependent on what you think serves you in your scenarios, because I really go back and forth on it to this day. So for me, I thought a couple of things. One, at the time, I don't think I had the following built in enough to be able to do it on my own. Today, maybe that's different, but at the time, a couple of years ago, I didn't think that. So that was one thing. I wanted the marketing support from a publisher. Two, I wanted kind of the traditional, like, kind of old school clout of having a publisher. And I say that because my industry is kind of old school. It's classical music, right? And so I thought that that there was some like credibility bar that came with having a publisher. Now, as those words come out of my mouth, I kind of want to barf a little, because I don't think that that's like necessarily true today, but at the time I thought it was kind of a match for my industry. So that's what I mean. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's really about like where people are at and what they want. But for me, that was the two big guiding forces in that decision. And then what was it like working with an editor? That part was actually awesome. I loved my editor. Thought she was wonderful. Was a real just mental counterpart, in some ways a sparring partner in all the right ways, and just a great counterbalance to what I was doing, and definitely made the work stronger, in my opinion.
That's really great. All right, cool. And so what should folks expect of an editor? What is that relationship? Maybe it depends on the editor and the publisher, but what did you rely on them for? What did you have to do on your own? And what should you ask from them?
Let's see. My editor and I don't know if this is, you can tell me if this is what everybody says, but we had these like epic comment threads on so many parts of our manuscript. So, so in some ways, let's see, she definitely, I already mentioned the jargon and her like pushing back and being like, what do you mean? And so there was a lot of that. It was a lot of, from her part, a lot of questions. What are you trying to say here? What are other words, or questions that to her, it was clear, like upon reading, like, are you trying to say this? Do you mean that? Like, so evoking clarity on my part. So there was that, just really in many ways, you get so close to it when it's your own work, right? And so to have this set of fresh eyes, I think was just so helpful of how somebody new reading it is experiencing the narrative. So it was a lot of that, a lot of questions. Sometimes it was the nitpicky stuff, but that actually comes way later. Put the comma here or whatever, cite this differently or more thoroughly. That all is at the very end. But yeah, those first couple rounds was just a lot of trying to, like I said, provoke clarity, ask questions. Not a lot of reorganization. Just a little bit in the introduction, we did some reorganization, but other than that, yeah, I think it was just providing that fresh set of eyes.
That's great. That's fantastic. Okay, really quick, marketing. What was it like? How did you get the word out about your book, both before, during, and after?
Marketing was the part, I'll say, even going to the publisher, had to do way more on my own than I thought I was going to have to. So I don't know if that has been a through line of the different conversations.
Yes,
nodding head. Nodding head. Okay. So, and this is where I brought in your fiance. I said, I really want to hire a publicist who knows my industry, and had only wanted to work with Lisa for years. So I was like, all right, this is it. Let's work together. So I'm really glad I made that decision and choice. And it was just helpful to have that support within my industry. And then the publisher's marketing team, they were pitching to, their outlets, their contact list. And so it was a real, pretty clear cut division of labor in that way of like, who's reaching out to who. And yeah, I think that's the main thing though, is so much more I had to do on my own than I anticipated. And I think this is, publishing is an industry, not unlike classical music, that has changed a lot in recent years, is really under pressure to be, I was going to say profitable, but in a different, like have funding in a different way than it used to flow in the past. And so just watching that, and then watching, understaffed organizations, just like arts organizations. And that way it's like kind of eerie to see some of those parallels and realize like, okay, yeah, they're not just sitting on a pile of marketing cash waiting to spend it on my book. Right. So that, and I don't think I was ever that disillusioned, but yeah, that was the piece where I thought, okay, like for anybody considering self-publishing or not, I think that's a point in the column of self-publishing in many ways, if you're still going to have to do so much work either way.
Yeah. And you're talking social media posts, you're talking launch parties, you're talking what else?
Yeah.
What kinds of things?
Yeah, those are good ones. What else? Definitely lining up speaking engagements, which was already part of my work, but I thought maybe I would have more help on that. Not really. I ended up hiring an administrative assistant to help me with that part, just like the booking, like the administrative aspects of it. And then what else? I'm trying to think. What else? A lot of just like reader incentives, the incentivizing pre-orders. What do you want to give away? What do you want to trade? And then even after the book had been out a bit, trying to come up with new incentives, that sort of thing. And I thought, the publisher was very supportive of all of that. I'll say, they're like, what do you need? Do you need giveaway copies? Do you want us to mail advanced reader copies to anybody? So in that sense, they were very supportive. They didn't shut down any ideas, but yeah, coming up with them, like as I'm struggling to do right now, like that's kind of on us, I think, as the author.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another type of storytelling, right? Outside sort of the meta story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Final words of advice for potential book authors. What's your final advice for them?
I think if you have something that you have a story you want to tell, you have advice you want to give, the playbook, the guidebook we talked about, like I think if the desire is strong, that's a requirement, maybe is a way to say it, because I think without having like that deep seated, like I got to get this out in the world and a desire to help people, I think everything else we've talked about becomes very challenging, like just the motivation to keep going and putting in the time and the work. And so I think that's my advice, is just get very clear on, what is it that you want to say once that fire's lit, then it's go time, then do it, I think is the other piece of advice. Just do it.
That's fantastic. Aubrey, where can people see more about your work and find out more about the book?
AubreyBergauer.com. That's my website. AubreyBergauer.com/book gets you right there. And as we were just talking about, I've got freebie downloads if you go there. All kinds of things you can get if you're interested, and on social media at Aubrey Bergauer.
Fantastic. Aubrey, this is such a great conversation. Thanks for sharing your insights, and really impressive what you've done with this book and moving a market that is outside of my realm, but very impressive. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your ideas.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed my conversation with Aubrey, check out the show notes for links to her book, her website, and her social media channels, where you can reach out and find out more about her work and upcoming events. If you're interested in writing your own nonfiction book, stick around, because I have a link to my website where you can find out more about upcoming webinars and resources for publishing. That's at storytellingwithpurpose.com. Until next time, I'm Michael Hernandez.